Welcome everybody, my name is Adi. I think most of you already know me. We thank you as a BZD staff, thank you for joining us today. We have Tomer with us, he's an expert Tel Aviv guiding tour, and we are doing the Trail of Independence. So let me introduce Tomer and then we will begin. So Tomer Shlush is a Tel Aviv expert guiding walking tours since 2008. A descendant of one of the founding families of Tel Aviv, Tomer has a unique perspective of the city history. Combining history, culture, and architecture, Tomer's tours are a great source of knowledge, as well as a fun way to get to know a place. Tours guided by Tomer are labeled TLVXP. Tel Aviv Explained by Tel Aviv Expert. Tomer has recently developed a new line of tours in Tel Aviv that can be delivered online, and now we are going to have one of these virtual tours. Please feel free to send your questions for Tomer in the chat during the presentation, and we will answer them at the end. Tomer, they are all yours.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. So we got about an hour to do a virtual tour of Tel Aviv. I'm very excited. Thank you guys for having me. What a lovely bunch. Usually I start off by saying hello to each and everyone individually, but 60 people almost in this group, so I'm going to refrain myself. So we're going to start off with something that Adi mentioned just a second ago, which is what I started during this extraordinary time that we're living in, which is the virtual tours of Tel Aviv. So staying at home was the only thing that I could, but I couldn't stop guiding people in Tel Aviv. So how do you do that? From your home, you develop virtual tours. I want to show you how it looks on my site. As Adi mentioned, it's called TLVXP.com, TLVXP for Tel Aviv Explained, Tel Aviv Explored, Tel Aviv Expert, or whatever you'd like. So you log on to my site and you can see at least two, the third is coming up shortly, 2 virtual tours that you can do on your own. These are the 360 tours that hopefully you are now seeing on your screen. So I'm putting the 360 tour on the big screen. You can see that you can move the panorama right, left, up, down to all views, and you also have a little bit of augmented reality that you can click and then see a picture and a little bit of explanation. And you can move from one scene to the next. So you can basically do the tour that we're doing right now on your own and feel a little bit like you are in Tel Aviv, which is a good thing. I am now in Tel Aviv, talking to you from the comfort of my house with the virtual background of Rothschild Boulevard. Rothschild Boulevard in the center of Tel Aviv is also the area where the city started from. And that's the place that we're going to magically visit today. Why magically? Because I am magically changing my virtual background, and you'll be walking with me through Tel Aviv in this manner. So we start out at Rothschild Boulevard and we'll visit our first spot. So we are now at the beginning of Rothschild Boulevard. Rothschild Boulevard, like number 3 is the one behind me. That's number 3 Rothschild Boulevard. And we start out with this mosaic behind me. This mosaic that you see pupils are coming to visit is the starting point for the Trail of Independence. So you might be familiar with the Trail of Freedom in Boston. As you know, we're Jewish, so we copy the good stuff from all other countries. So we copied that and we put a Trail of Independence in Tel Aviv, which is connecting 10 sites relating to the independence of Israel and the establishment of Tel Aviv. And we're going to do a virtual tour of that trail. So we start off with this mosaic, which is a historical depiction of the city that we are visiting today. And this is important because we need to understand that Tel Aviv is actually Tel Aviv Jaffa, a combination of 2 cities. One, Jaffa, is very, very old, very ancient, and the other is Tel Aviv, very new. we need to understand the story of the place that we're visiting through this very unique combination. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to show you the mosaic. So you see the mosaic of Nahum Gutman. He was raised in Tel Aviv. He actually lived on the street that is depicted in the middle of this mosaic. This is the first street in Tel Aviv. You should be seeing my mouse running over your screen. So this is Herzl Street. At the end of it, there's this school that we're going to talk about shortly. And Nahum Gutman used to live in this house on Herzl Street and the corner of Rothschild Boulevard. He was very connected to its history, and this mosaic is his way of showing us the history of the place that he was raised in as a child. You can see two mosaics on either side of the middle. These are depictions of biblical scenes in which Jaffa is mentioned. So Jaffa, as we said, is a very old city, so old that it is already mentioned in the Bible. One of the scenes I'm going to show you even larger now. One of the scenes is of this boat going through the waves of the Mediterranean, and you can also see a guy being thrown from the boat and then gets eaten by a whale. So this, as you might have guessed, is Jonah, the prophet, and he is a little bit sad of a story. That is mentioned in the Bible. He went to see through the Jaffa port. And Gutman transports us immediately from biblical times to early days of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was established in 1909, a few thousand years after Jonah the prophet. Yet Nahum Gutman connects the Bible to the inception of Tel Aviv, as if to say, this is the reason that we came back to the land of Israel and started Tel Aviv, dubbed the first Hebrew city in the world in the modern times. These are kind of the central columns in that mosaic, in this work of art by Nahum Gutman, but there are some 12 scenes around those central columns that are offering some more scenes from the history of Jaffa and Tel Aviv. The most important one is this scene in the mosaic by Nahum Gutman that also shows us the greatness of Nahum Gutman as an artist. With just 2.5 stones, you can see an image that is decipherable. You might be able to guess that this person reading from a page is David Ben-Gurion with his magnificent hairdo. He's reading out the Proclamation of Independence, or the Declaration of Independence, the place where it happened. This is also on our trail, the Trail of Independence. So now we're going to go to our next destination. Before we do that, I want to show you exactly where we're walking. So I'm going to do my Houdini trick. I'm going to vanish for a second. There you go. I've vanished, and now you'll be able to see on the pavement, there's a metal line. This is also similar to the Boston Freedom Trail, which is like a physical manifestation of the trail. You can see it in the ground, in the pavement in Tel Aviv. So we're going to walk on the Trail of Independence that each and every one of us can do on their own just by following this trail in real life. So we're doing it virtually. So from the mosaic by Nahum Gutman, I am now going to transport us to our next destination. Not far away, just a few steps away, we'll be able to see this house, the house behind me. So I'm going to vanish just for a second again, so you'll be able to see it even better. This house belonged to a person called Akiva Arys. If you haven't heard the name, don't worry about it. Most Israelis don't know him, but we're going to talk about him because he is of special significance to the city that we're visiting, because he was the guy, the man with the plan, the guy who had the idea to establish Tel Aviv. He was the guy who suggested on his arrival to the land of Israel to start a new Hebrew city, the first Hebrew city to be established in modern times. This is interesting because he was a watchmaker and a vegetarian and probably kind of a rude character, because on his first day in the land of Israel, he comes with a boat and he lands at the Jaffa port. On his first day, he gathers some of the Jews in Jaffa and he tells them, we need to start a new city. Kind of rude, you know, if I were to come to Baltimore tomorrow and would say, guys, let's start a new Baltimore right across the river, you would probably think I'm rude, right? So maybe he was the first Israeli, in a sense, the first rude Israeli. So he says, guys, Jaffa is very dense. It's enclosed within a wall. It doesn't have the modern infrastructure that a modern city needs. And we have all come here to the land of Israel to start anew, to renew our national life in the land of Israel, to create a new homeland for ourselves. So a good first step would be to start a new city. So let's do it. He gathered 60 families, 60 Jewish families in Jaffa who followed him to start this new city. Now you're seeing on my screen, I'm sharing my screen to show you Akiva Arys, the first rude Israeli. So this was 1906 that Akiva Arys came here. As we said, he landed at the Jaffa port. Now you see Jaffa and how cool it looks from the Mediterranean coast. This is actually a picture from the time that Akiva Arys came to Jaffa. It has changed a little bit since. And as we said, he gathered 60 families, 60 Jewish families to start a new city. And this is the birth photo of Tel Aviv. Kelvin, thank you for asking. Where did Weiss come from? He came from Eastern Europe. To be exact, he came from a Polish city of Lodz, if I'm not mistaken. The Polish city of Lodz, back then a part of the Russian Empire. So, Akiva Arys, 1909, 3 years after his arrival, he was able to gather the 60 founding families of what will be the city of Tel Aviv. They gathered on the sand dunes outside of Jaffa, the part of land that they were able to purchase. And then they needed to decide which family is going to get which part of the land to construct its house. So how do you do that so it will be fair? Because, you know, different places in this lot of land might be a little better or a little worse. Depends on where the wind is blowing. So to be fair, they did a lottery. They sent kids to gather seashells from the beach, white seashells and black seashells. In the white ones, they wrote down the names of the families. In the black ones, they wrote down the numbers of the lots of land, like they parceled it out on the map. So one kid took out a white seashell, the other one a black seashell, and that's how they matched each family with its lot of land. So I wish you would have had a seashell from back then, because then you would have a house like this in the center of Tel Aviv today. Akiva Arys, by the way, he wanted his house to be built by Jews. He imagined a city for Jews, built by Jews, and at the time it was a problem because the local material from which houses were built at the time was a kind of rock that was that you would dig out from near the beach, and it was crumbling very easily. So only the local Arab masons knew how to work this material to make the house stand so it wouldn't crumble apart. As more and more Jews came to the land of Israel and he wanted them to go into the construction business, he needed to change the material. So you can see that his house was built by bricks. You can see it on the first story of the house. The first story or the first floor? I'm not sure how Americans are going, with floor or story. So we visited the house of Akiva Arys, the guy who had the idea to start Tel Aviv. And if I were to stand here in the street and look behind me, to what is on the other side of the street, right in front of Akiva Arys' house, I would see this place that you will now be able to see behind me. See it? This building is the Shalom Tower. Now it is an office building. When it was built in the 1960s, it was not only the tallest building in Israel, but also the tallest building in the Middle East, and also the tallest building in Asia, later surpassed by many buildings to come. But at the time, it was the tallest building, the first skyscraper built in Israel, and the tallest building in Israel for quite a while. Where was it built? You remember we saw in the mosaic by Nahum Gutman that at the end of Herzl Street, let me vanish myself again. Well, this is the end of Herzl Street. At the end of Herzl Street, there was the first school in Tel Aviv. Now I'm going to share my screen again so you'll be able to see that school. So the school is called the Gymnasia Herzliya. This was the first school in Tel Aviv. It was also the first school in the world to only give lessons in Hebrew, which is amazing. So this was a very important landmark in Tel Aviv. As you can see, it was designed in a very elaborate way because the people in Tel Aviv really saw it as kind of a jewel of the crown of Tel Aviv. Most important place in Tel Aviv, symbolizing the renewal of Jewish life in the land of Israel. It was actually supposed to look similar to the descriptions of the temple in Jerusalem with its facade. That's how important it was for the Tel Avivians. But what happened later is that in 1959, after 50 years of operations, 2 graduates of this school manifested the dream of every school kid, which is to come and tear down the school. And that's what they did. With license, they took it down and instead they built the Shalom Tower, the first skyscraper in Israel. One more thing about that. Later, people in Israel thought, wow, what a mistake it was to destroy such an important building, such a magnificent building, a landmark here in Tel Aviv. And the Council for the Preservation of Historical Sites in Israel was founded. You can see the inscription in Hebrew that says the Council for the Preservation of Historical Sites in Israel. For their logo, they chose the facade of that school, the first school in Tel Aviv, as if to say, let's not repeat that mistake. Let's keep our built heritage. Let's preserve it. And since then, we have had a lot of buildings saved and preserved in Tel Aviv and across Israel, thanks for the Council for the Preservation of Historical Sites in Israel. One of these examples is the house of Akiva Arys, the house that we saw earlier. Just one other thing that I wanted to mention, right next to the house of Akiva Arys is this statue. On the back of the statue is the house of Akiva Arys, and to its right is the Shalom Tower. And right here passes the Trail of Independence. This sculpture was situated quite recently in its spot. This is a depiction of Captain Alfred Dreyfus. Captain Alfred Dreyfus was a French officer, was a Jewish officer in the French army, and he was accused wrongfully of treason. At the end of his trial, he gets his sword kicked off, and that's the depiction that you see here in this statue, right next to the Shalom Tower and Akiva Arys' house. Why is this a good place to situate this statue? Because Alfred Dreyfus gave inspiration to a person that you might have heard about, tall guy with a beard. His name is Herzl. So Theodor Herzl was a reporter who went to the Dreyfus trial, and he was appalled by the anti-Semitism that Dreyfus was confronted with. He needed to find a solution to anti-Semitism, he writes a book in Paris that was called The Jewish State, or The State of Jews. It depends on the translation. And in which he gives his solution to the problem of anti-Semitism, which is actually the title of the book, A Jewish State. Herzl gave inspiration to Akiva Arys. After Herzl passed away, Weiss decided to manifest the Zionist dream, come to the land of Israel, and start out a new city, that is Tel Aviv. So Dreyfus gave inspiration to Herzl, that gave inspiration to Akiva Arys, and that's how Tel Aviv started. Okay, so I'm stopping my screen share to bring us all back to this spot. We are close to the Shalom Tower. Now we're going to turn our back to the Shalom Tower, walk down Herzl Street. No wonder that the main street in Tel Aviv, when it started, was named after Herzl, and the school was also named after Herzl. As we said, this was the guy who gave the inspiration to establish Tel Aviv. And now we're walking down Herzl Street to get to Rothschild Boulevard, at which we will visit the first business place in Tel Aviv. The first business place in Tel Aviv is the business that you see behind me. This is the first kiosk. As you can see, it's still operating since Tel Aviv's early days to today. It's still in operation, and you can see there's quite a line outside. We're walking on the Trail of Independence. Behind me, over this shoulder, you see the line in the ground that is the Trail of Independence. And this is our our fourth stop, the first business place in Tel Aviv. And I wanted to show you what you would have seen if you were in Tel Aviv 100 years ago. So walking down from the gymnasium, you would go to Rothschild Boulevard. Before the boulevard was planted with trees and beautifully made, it was just a lot of sand dunes. And when the founders of Tel Aviv started to construct their houses, they didn't thought that there would be any businesses in Tel Aviv. They thought that all the businesses would stay in Jaffa, and Tel Aviv would be a quiet suburb of Jaffa. But starting to build their houses in the sand dunes under the hot sun, they saw that it was very hard to walk half an hour to Jaffa just to get a beverage. So they allowed one kiosk owner to open up shop in Tel Aviv. And the one guy who did it was the owner of this kiosk. And I want to tell you about one of the kids in the picture. Actually, not one of them, but a kid like one of them, who is my grandfather. He used to live in Tel Aviv. He was born and raised in Tel Aviv. He was born in 1923, so not that long after the starting of Tel Aviv, after Tel Aviv was established. And he used to go to the school, the Gymnasium Herzliya. And after school, he would go to this kiosk and ask for a soda with a little bit of raspberry syrup. And one time, the kiosk owner, his name was Rubanenko, Ruba in short. So he told him, Ruba, can I get a soda? And he gave him a soda. And then my grandfather sees inside his glass, there's a bee in his beverage, swimming in his soda. So he tells him, Ruba, I have a bee in my glass. And Ruba, he had a weird sense of humor. He looked at it, started him, and he said, oh, well, don't tell anybody. I don't have enough bees for all of you guys. So that was Ruba's sense of humor. I hope my grandfather got a refund for that, but I'm not sure. He never told me. So this is the first business place in Tel Aviv, later to become the business capital of Israel, with the headquarters of all the banks in Israel and also the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, not far from where we're standing. Today, Rothschild Boulevard is also dubbed the Silicon Wadi, kind of the equivalent of the Silicon Valley, in the sense that it has a lot of startups, a lot of high-tech companies very close to the Rothschild Boulevard area. So we're continuing on the Trail of Independence. Right behind me, you see the trail. We're going to go through the people here to get to number 16 Rothschild Boulevard, a very important place, and rightly so. Behind me, you now see me. This is me guiding a group in Tel Aviv. So right next to me in the picture, you see the sheriff of Tel Aviv. This guy, you might have heard the name, is Meir Dizengoff. There's a really major street in Tel Aviv named after him. He was the sheriff of Tel Aviv in the sense that he was in charge of everything. After Akiva Arys initiated the establishment of Tel Aviv, Meir Dizengoff had the wisdom, the cunning wisdom, to push him a little bit aside and become the mayor of Tel Aviv. He was the first mayor of Tel Aviv, and they say that he was riding his horse through the streets, a female horse, by the way, called Meira. Not Meira after himself, Meir Dizengoff, Meira because she was fast. Mahir is fast, Meira is fast. So she was a very fast horse, but actually Meir Dizengoff wouldn't ride her very quickly because he would go around Tel Aviv making sure that everything's okay. And if he would see some kid in Tel Aviv that was bummed out, he would tell him, come with me, join me on a ride on my horse. He would ride, the kid would ride with him on the horse, and he would be much happier again. So why is there a statue of the first mayor of Tel Aviv, Meir Dizengoff, right here in front of number 16 Rothschild Boulevard? This was the house of Meir Dizengoff, the first house of the first mayor here on Rothschild Boulevard. Later, in 1936, Meir Dizengoff passed away, and in his will, he bequeathed his house to the city of Tel Aviv. He actually had no kids of his own, so he asked the city to make it into a place for kids. And if you were at the city council at the time, you would think about a place for kids in Tel Aviv. Maybe you would think to turn it into a kind of a playground or a fun place for kids. At the time, the Tel Aviv Council in 1936 thought that the best thing to give kids in Tel Aviv is an art museum. So this is how the Tel Aviv Art Museum started, in this house, the house of the first mayor of Tel Aviv. In 1948, the Tel Aviv Museum was also the place for a very important event. I'm going to share the screen again to show you Meir Dizengoff, and this is the kind of a more recent view of the place at the Rothschild Boulevard, the number 16 Rothschild Boulevard, the place where his house used to be, and turned into the Tel Aviv Art Museum, the first place where the Tel Aviv Art Museum used to be. And later, in 1948, a great event took place in this place, which is, you can see all the crowds outside. People were very excited about this event. May 14th, 1948, the heads of the Jewish settlement in Israel gathered inside the Tel Aviv Art Museum to manifest the dream of the guy whose picture is up there on the curtain, Theodor Herzl, and the guy here, David Ben-Gurion, is declaring the establishment of the state of Israel. So the place where the first mayor of Tel Aviv lived later became the place where David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, declared the independence of Israel. And if you weren't excited up until now, well, we better leave it to Ben-Gurion to deliver it in his words. I hope you'll be able to hear it.
נתכנסנו, אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל.
He's getting excited, that's why he's pausing.
מתוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
Fantastic. So, you've heard him in his own words. He said that we're establishing a new Jewish state in the land of Israel to be known as the State of Israel, which is really exciting. We're reliving the experience. Okay, so As you can see, David Ben-Gurion gives the Declaration of Independence and everybody signs off on it. You actually see in this picture 3 prime ministers to be. One is David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister. Moshe Sheret on the other side also signed the Declaration of Independence as Moshe Shertok at the time, later Moshe Sheret. And this lady is Golda Meirson at the time, later to be known as Golda Meir, the 4th prime minister. And as we said, this place on the Trail of Independence, the house of the first mayor of Tel Aviv, Mayor Dizengoff on your right, and the place where David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, on your left, this is where the 2 stories collide. This is where they merge, which is amazing because today people in Israel consider Tel Aviv to be a little detached from the story of Israel or from the Zionist dream. They consider it to be a little detached. And here we see that Tel Aviv and Israel were created. They started in the very same spot. Okay. We have 3 more places that we want to go to, 3 or 4 more places, as much as we can manage with the short time that we still have. So our next destination is the monument for the founders of Tel Aviv, just a few steps away from the house of Mayor Dizengoff. On this monument, you see a work of art, a design that was made to showcase the history of Tel Aviv as it started. I'm going to share my screen again. This is our 7th spot in the Trail of Independence. This monument was constructed where the first water tower of Tel Aviv was. So this is how it looked in the early days of Tel Aviv. It was destroyed in the 1940s, and then they constructed this monument for the founders of Tel Aviv in its place. You see here the names of the 66 founding families of Tel Aviv, including at the very bottom, at the very end, you see one name that repeats twice. This is Shlush. That's my surname because my great-great-grandfather is Yosef Eliyahu Shlush, one before last here on this monument. Now, he built the house on Rothschild Boulevard number 9, but he didn't leave me anything. So I do tours. So I do these tours instead. But very happy to do them. So on this monument, on its back or in its front, like where I'm standing right now, you see this work of art that shows us 3 layers in the history of Tel Aviv. At the very bottom, you see the wheelbarrow pushers that needed to level out the land, the sand dunes for the construction of the first houses in Tel Aviv. In the middle, you see Tel Aviv in its early years with the school, with one of the first houses, with the water tower that was situated where this monument is right now. And you also see Tel Aviv in 1949. That's the year that this work of art was made in. But most importantly, you see behind the 1949 Tel Aviv, skyscrapers. At the very top, there are skyscrapers on the monument. These skyscrapers weren't in Tel Aviv in 1949. The tallest building in Tel Aviv in 1949 is 4 stories high. So, where did these skyscrapers came from? This is the imagination of the artist who said that one day Tel Aviv is going to become a sort of Israeli New York, a sort of gateway to the land of Israel for all Jews to come, and the city of skyscraper as it is. And when you look at Tel Aviv right now, you can see that it is living up to that expectation. Okay, so we don't have much time for the rest of our tour, so I'm going to kind of waltz, to kind of breeze through our last 3 spots along the Trail of Independence. So the building behind me, site number 8 on our Trail of Independence. The artist asks Linda is called Avraham Priver, the guy who made the etching, I think would be the right word for it, the work of art that we just saw on the monument for the founders of Tel Aviv. Okay, I missed one of the questions. Okay, this is good. Okay, so I didn't miss anything. Okay, so the site behind me is connected to the history of finance in Israel. This was the office building that was used by the Israel Bank, because when we're talking about independence, we not only have political independence, but also economic independence. And what a better representation of that is the Bank of Israel. So here today, right off or off Rothschild Boulevard, you'll be able to visit the visitor center of the Bank of Israel that is also showcasing the history of money that was used in Israel from its early years up until today. Our next stop on the Trail of Independence, one before last, is the house that is on this shoulder behind it. You see this house. This is now the Haganah Museum. This is amazing because we said that the Trail of Independence is connecting two stories: the story of the establishment of Tel Aviv and the establishment of the State of Israel, but it is also connected another story, which is the establishment of the IDF, the Israeli army. You can see the Haganah Museum. It also says here at the top, Bet Eliyahu Golom, the house of Eliyahu Golom. This was the house of one of the heads of the Haganah. That was the organization that was founded in the 1920s to protect the Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. In 1940s Tel Aviv, you were able to see Eliyahu Golom sitting here on his balcony, talking to the other heads of the Haganah about all the important military, paramilitary operations that needed to be done. Also, the illegal immigration of Jews at the time, what we call Pala, that was the arrival of illegal Jewish immigrants at the time to what was then British Palestine. And this is where the headquarters of the Haganah, in a sense, were. So this is the place where the Haganah operated from, and the Haganah in 1948 turned into Tzva Haganah, the IDF, the Israeli army, Tzva Haganah Israel. So this is also the starting point of the Israeli army. Today it's a museum for the history of the Haganah, and now we're going to our last destination. We go to Rothschild. We continue on Rothschild Boulevard, turn left to Allenby Street, and we get to this place, which is called the Great Synagogue, and rightly so. This was the most important synagogue in Tel Aviv, built in 1930 or inaugurated in 1930. Actually, it was such an elaborate building that it took 20 years to complete. I do want to share the screen right now to show you a picture of how the synagogue used to look like when it was such a magnificent building in Tel Aviv in the 1930s. You see the great synagogue of Tel Aviv in 1930s Tel Aviv with its magnificent dome at the time, which you can't really see right now because there was an addition of kind of a modernist layout outside of the building, so it looks not as beautiful as before. There are now plans to take this modern facade off and kind of retrieve the original way that the synagogue used to look. Just to give kind of another interesting point about the synagogue, behind the synagogue there's a small street called Mount Sinai Street. That street houses one of the most popular bars in Tel Aviv. On a Friday night you can go to the synagogue, and after praying there on Shabbat Eve you can go and buy a beer at the next door pub, which kind of shows you what way of life Tel Aviv has right now, in which you have kind of a coexistence between secular and Jews, which is quite rare in other places. Not quite rare, but a little less a little less obvious in other places in Israel or across Israel. So that was our tour of Tel Aviv.